Ulysses, Part 2, The Wanderings of Odysseus, Episode 9, Scylla and Charbidis. The time, 2 o'clock, or academic 2 o'clock, which is about 10 past 2. The scene, library, in this case the National Library on Kildare Street, beside the current Irish Parliament, and just across from just beyond the Irish Parliament is the museum that Bloom had slipped into. The colour, there is none. Technique, Whirlpools, Dialectic. Correspondences. The rock is Aristotle. The whirlpool, Plato. Dogma and Mysticism. London, Ulysses is Socrates. Jesus, Shakespeare, Telemachus and Antinous. The science or art, appropriately, is literature, and the meaning is a two-edged dilemma. The organ, again, appropriately, the brain. Symbols would include Hamlet, Shakespeare, Christ, Socrates. London and Stratford, Scholasticism and Mysticism, Plato and Aristotle, youth and maturity. Other characters include John Eglinton, George Russell, that is known as A.E., and Mr. Best the librarian. Plot. Urbane to comfort them, the quaker librarian purred, and we have we not, those priceless pages of Wilhelm Meister. Stephen Dedalus is in the library, all set to lecture on Shakespeare and Hamlet before a small crowd of his friends and other literary types. They go back and forth at length about the various matters of Shakespeare, and Stephen finds himself at one point even defending Aristotle. We get a good insight into Stephen's thoughts again. Very highbrow and very important or deep. Stephen compares Hamlet and Shakespeare's biography. Mulligan arrives and takes over to a degree, with Stephen not getting a word in edgewise for a couple of pages. Don't forget, this is meant to be Daedalus's lecture. We hear someone is looking for a copy of the Kilkenny People. Bloom is on the hunt for the ad for the House of Keys he was talking about in Aeolus, and he was heading here in the previous chapter. Back to Daedalus, and they are discussing the will of Shakespeare and the second best bed. Stephen finally hits his thesis, that Shakespeare is playing the ghost of the old king, and when he was doing that, he is speaking directly to his dead son Hamlet, rather than Hamlet. Eglinton puts it to him directly. Do you believe your own theory? No, Stephen said promptly. Mulligan and Daedalus depart, Mulligan taking one last snipe at Bloom. In the spirit of reconciliation, the Quaker librarian breathed. There can be no reconciliation, Stephen said, if there has not been a sundering. Said that. If you want to know what are the events which cast their shadows over the hell of the time of King Lear, Othello, Hamlet, Troilus and Cressida, look to see when and how the shadow lifts. What softens the heart of a man? Shipwrecked in storms dire, tired, like another Ulysses, Pericles the Prince of Tyre? Head red cone capped, buffeted, brine blinded. A child, a girl, placed in his arms, Marina. He had 3 brothers, Gilbert, Edmund, Richard. Gilbert, in his old age, told some cavaliers, he got a pass for now, went from Meister Gatherer one time mass he did, and he seen his blood Meister Wool, the playwright up in London, in a wrestling play with a man on his back. The playhouse sausage filled Gilbert's soul. He is nowhere. But an Edmund and a Richard are recorded in the works of Sweet William. For a guinea, Stephen said, you can publish this interview. Buck Mulligan stood up from his laughing scribbling, laughing, and then gravely said, honeying malice, I called upon the bard Kinch at his summer residence in Upper Mecklenburg Street, and found him deep in the study of the Summa Contra Gentiles, in the company of 2 gonorrheal ladies, Thresh Nelly and Rosalie, the coal key whore. He broke away. Come, Kinch, come, wandering Angus of the birds. Trapped in a confine of intellect, dressed all in black, still ambivalently mourning a parent and thinking exclusively about Hamlet. Am I talking about Hamlet or about Daedalus? We start with Eglinton comparing all Irish endeavour for the worse with Shakespeare. Our young Irish bards, John Eglinton censured, have yet to create a figure which the world will set beside Saxon Shakespeare's Hamlet. It is fairly clear that Joyce is taking this head on. Shakespeare is the one English writer that Joyce seems to have respected, but like his fellow Irishman Shaw, he was willing to square off against him. It's also worth noting here that Joyce flirts with all manner of writing formats, giving us dramatic and poetic, prose and journalistic in the chapter. Noting all the contrasting pairings in the symbols pushes me to an odd thought. Hamlet is very much a play about one person, no disrespect Horatio, but it's really all about Hamlet. Stephen aspires to this, but perhaps Bloom more accurately represents this. Stephen is held back in so many ways by his association with the clownish Mulligan. Perhaps it's possible to see Daedalus Moore at this moment, especially with that big hat, as another Don Quixote, with Mulligan as the cut-price Sancho Panza, distracting him from the, let's call it, the ineluctable modality of the living.
On the